Something interesting to talk about today. This is a study that I actually came across a couple of years ago, and we've never talked about it. And it's pretty fascinating. And actually, the topic came up earlier in the week with someone because if you guys want to sit down, you can take a little break. If you want to stand, you're more than welcome. This topic came up this week with a client because they were concerned about their immobility. They've just had a stroke and there's some paralysis on the left side of the body and it's really hard to stand. In fact, they can't stand without help. And so what we're doing is working on creating and reestablishing that mind-muscle connection. But it got me thinking about the Dallas bed rest study. This is fascinating. So what happens when you don't exercise? We all know through common sense, general knowledge now in the year 2022, if you don't exercise, it's not good, right? You may not know the reasons why they're not good, but you know the less you move, the more dangerous that is, right? You're risking loss of muscle, you're risking endurance, and plus, what about your heart? What happens when we walk? We literally call that cardiovascular exercise, right? So let me tell you a little bit about the Dallas bed rest story, all right? Well, let me backtrack and give you a little information. Changes as we age start as early as the third decade, so in our 30s. After the age of 25 and 30, the average man's max attainable heart rate declines by about 1 beat per minute per year. His heart's peak capacity to pump blood drifts down by 5 or 10%. That's significant because that leads to our endurance. Our muscles need oxygenated blood to contract, and if you cannot get the max amount of blood to that muscle, that's going to impact your endurance. Does that make sense? That's why, you remember Lance Armstrong and those guys, they actually would take blood, draw it out of themselves, put them in centrifuges, spin it, and infuse oxygen into their own blood, and then on race day, inject it back into them. Wow. Because their O2 level would be super high. That was one of the things they did, okay? So, you're talking about a decreased ability to have endurance. A 25-year-old heart can pump about 2.5 quarts of blood per minute, but a 65-year-old can't get above 1.5 quarts. Pretty impactful. An 80-year-old heart can pump only about 1 quart. So you can kind of see how that immobility just by nature hits you, okay? By the fact that you're just not getting the oxygenated blood. Not only that, but our total body water volume decreases as well. The Dallas bed rest study, what they did was they took a group of guys, all right? In 1966, 5 healthy men volunteered for a research study at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, all right? What they did, they spent 3 weeks of their summer vacation resting in bed. These researchers wanted to find out what happens when you are on bed rest, all right? When they got out of bed at the end of the trial, probably didn't seem so good. Testing the men before and after exercise, the researchers found devastating changes that included faster heart rates, higher systolic blood pressures, a drop in the heart's maximum pumping capacity, a rise in body fat, a fall in muscle strength. All right, this was the results of the study. In 3 weeks, however, the 20-year-olds developed many psychological characteristics of men twice their age. Fortunately, the scientists didn't stop there. Instead, they put them in on an 8-week exercise program. All right, now remember, these are 20-year-olds. On an 8-week exercise program, and the exercise did more than reverse the deterioration brought on by the bed rest, and since some measurements were better than ever after training. So even before they went in, some of their measurements, that the 5 impacts were better. All right, it was a dramatic demonstration of the harmful consequences of bed rest. Now, here's an interesting thing. They revisited these same men 30 years later. The same men, they revisited 30 years later, all right? And by revisiting the question 30 years later, the Texas researchers have also been able to investigate the interaction between exercise and aging. The original subjects all agreed to be evaluated again at the age of 50. All 5 remained healthy and none required long-term medication. So you didn't have any on blood pressure medication or any kind of heart medication, like they had a stent or anything like that, okay, a pacemaker. And even so, the 30-year interval had not been kind to these guys. Over the years, the men gained an average of 50 pounds or 25% of their total body weight at the age of 20 as compared to their body weight at 20. Their average body fat doubled from 14 to 28%. Their cardiac function suffered. There was a rise in resting heart rate and blood pressure and a fall in maximum pumping capacity. In terms of cardiac functioning, the toll was not as severe as the toll of inactivity. At 50, the men were far below their 20-year-old best, but they were not quite as feeble as when they emerged from the 3 weeks of bed rest in 1966. Did you catch that? They were not quite as feeble as when they emerged from 3 weeks of bed rest in 1966. So the researchers, they didn't ask these 50-year-old volunteers to lie in bed for 3 weeks. That could be devastating, right? What they did was they got them into an exercise program. It was an 8-week crash course that served the 20-year-olds so well. But all they asked them to do was walk and jog. That's the max. You had a couple of them that actually went in and did some weights, some lifting, right? But basically, they just wanted you guys to walk and work out for 6 months, all right? Slow but steady endurance training carried the day. At the end of 6 months, the men averaged only a modest 10-pound loss of their excess weight, but their resting heart rates, blood pressure, heart's maximum pumping abilities were back to their baseline level from age 20. Think about that. That's your impact of exercise right there, all right? So, yeah. And we also know from research, we've covered this many times, the brain is malleable. And the impact that socialization has, the impact that exercise has on the brain helps us learn languages, remember words. It helps us learn our balance language, right? All right. Ready? Let's get to work.